Hello, my name is Jane Pierce. My business is Tarot Day Jane, and I'm here to talk to you about astrology. Today, I want to talk about Venus and Mars, the planet of love and war, the planets of the female and male symbols that our culture uses, or Western cultures used for thousands of years. Certainly, you might guess that Venus at times has been considered the feminine ruler, and Mars is considered the masculine ruler. I don't like to think of it that way as separating genders on an XX or XY basis. Rather, I think that Venus is the goddess of love, and in that, she is harmony, she is beauty, she is art. She certainly is a nurturing and pleasant energy to be with. As a matter of fact, Venus is considered the lesser benefic, the planet that makes everything better by its connection. In contrast, Mars is called the lesser malefic, the planet that makes everything harder. And Mars is heat and fast and adrenaline and all of the things that come with competition. Well, originally the god of war, and certainly a planet that rules fighting, I think of Mars being anything that we're getting hot and sweaty doing. So if we're competing, if we're hustling, if we're working hard, that's the Mars energy present from the sky coming in through our lives. And it's obviously with that heat, something that can be very good or very bad, kind of like a fire. We can use it to hustle. We can use it to have ambition. We can use it to go faster, to go more determined, but we can also use it to burn the whole thing down. So Venus, who loves harmony, is frequently the opposing energy of Mars, who likes conflict. I don't know if it's fair to say that Mars always likes conflict, although Mars is representing conflict energy. Mars gets conflict whether it likes it or not. In some signs, Mars is eager to get moving, to get fight, to go fast. And in other signs, Mars is very defensive and only fights when attacked. And that's part of the beauty of these archetypes of Venus and Mars that we're talking about today. The archetypes of harmony and conflict, those archetypes are going to change depending on what signs they go through. Let me talk a little bit about how these planets move. Venus can be as quickly as 3/4 of a year going around the sun. And as a matter of fact, that's what it's going to do in the second half of 23 into 24. There's no retrogrades in there. We all had quite a bit of retrograde in Venus in July of 23. So let me say those dates clearer. We consider a Venus cycle when Venus goes from 0 degrees Aries all the way back around to 0 degrees Aries. The length of time that takes varies wildly. Venus does not go retrograde every year. And so in a year that there's no Venus retrograde, Venus can make that cycle from 0 degrees Aries around and back to 0 degrees Aries in as little as 3/4 of a year, roughly 8 or 9 months. If there's a retrograde, that changes the whole story. Venus averages about 25 days, a little less than 4 weeks in each sign, except the summer of 23, when Venus went retrograde, it was over 4 months in Leo. You can see from 1 month to 4 months why the retrogrades of Venus are such a big deal. It's not just the energy of going towards something and then stopping, backing up, and running over it a third time. It is also that any time a planet spends that long in a sign, we are all collectively dealing with harmony defined by that sign, with beauty defined by that sign, with our artistic expression and our yearning to get along and to make things, if not harmonious, at least pleasant. If that's all defined by one sign, you have 4 months in 2023 when that was all about the definition from the perspective of Leo. And that's part of what makes the retrograde hard. Now, when Venus does take a retrograde period, which it will not be doing in 2024, woo, thank goodness, Venus will take about 18 months to go all the way around. So you take that 3/4 of your 8, 9 months and add those extra 4 months on, and probably a little more, because that process of going retrograde and forward means the planet is slowing down. It's not just covering a particular set of degrees or an area of Leo like it did in 2023. It's not just covering it 3 times, it's covering it slower, as it appears to stand still on the day Venus goes retrograde, and it appears to stand still on the day Venus goes direct. So what we get when we have Venus retrograde, whether or not it's happening in any given year or any given sign, we have 4 times the opinion of how harmony should be kept according to the sign that Venus has gone retrograde in. And that can make it really hard for those of us who may or may not have our own Venus, the Venus where it was when we were born, get along well with that outsized portion. For as a Scorpio Venus, you, which just happens to be where Venus is right now while I'm recording this in early December, Venus in Scorpio is at a harsh angle with Venus in Leo. So that doesn't mix well. There'll be a constant butting of heads between the energy that you, if you have Venus in Scorpio when you were born, your natal energy and the world's energy of artistic expression for 4 months. That's rough. As a matter of fact, I would argue that when Venus is not moving forward, or Venus is poorly aspected or struggling with a retrograde, we are all feel it so much more. Venus is never horrible, but she certainly sits out her peacekeeping mission in those times that she's dealing with retrograde. And that in itself is what makes Venus's retrograde period so hard. Now let's talk a little bit about Mars. We also call a Mars cycle from 0 degrees Aries going around to 0 degrees Aries again. That takes about 2 years, and always in that 2-year period includes a retrograde, because Mars goes retrograde every 2 years, and we don't look at its cycle in one Gregorian calendar year. We look at it from 0 degrees Aries to 0 degrees Aries. So looking forward, while there was no Mars retrograde in 2023, there will be a Mars retrograde in the cycle that starts in the spring of 24 and will go until the spring of 26. In that cycle, Mars will be in more than one sign. Usually Mars takes about 45 days to go through a sign. When Mars goes retrograde, that retrograde period is about 6 months. So a couple of years ago, when Mars went retrograde in Gemini, we had just over 6 months with Mars heating up, irritating, agitating, swelling, causing a fever in the area of our life that Gemini was ruling. And luckily, we have very little of that trouble this year in 2024. But when Mars goes retrograde, we have perhaps a different problem. While we don't have Mars giving us ambition, giving us competition, giving us initiative, what we have is Mars moving very slowly and still causing the heat, swelling, irritation that Mars does regardless of how fast it's going. Remember, the god of war is the red planet. And so there's this sense of heat, of red, of irritation and swelling and all of those things that if you imagine you have a sore finger, that it's going to be red and irritated and swollen. Those come from the energy of Mars. So wherever Mars gets into trouble in our chart, one of 2 different extremes happens. We can move really fast, or we can have our initiative and speed cut off. But either side of those, we are possibly looking at an irritation or a frustration. Frustration because things are speeding up and we're moving sometimes faster than our bodies can keep up with, or irritation and frustration because things have slowed down so horribly, so very much that it appears to come to a standstill when we hit that retrograde point. And that in itself is irritating and frustration. So wherever we've got those retrogrades, we're going to have some struggle. Now, with Mars, that struggle is going to be more annoying than with Venus, the absence of Venus's peacekeeping, as opposed to the increase in Mars irritation. But either way, Mars talks about how we handle conflict, and Venus talks about how we seek harmony, how we make peace, but also how we make art, how we make beauty, how we nurture the gardens around us, and whether those gardens are growing flowers or carrots for us to eat. Venus includes a bit of caregiving and business skill that is not as big and expansive and indulgent as Jupiter, but is certainly refined and cultured and enjoying of the finer things of life. Because Venus holds our place of pleasure. The sweetness of life is in Venus. And that energy is going to bump a couple times as we come up to 2024. And we'll talk about that in the next video. Right now, my hope for you is that you've got a feeling of how Venus is art, and then you can imagine, how does Venus' artistic temperament come through in the sign that Venus was when you were born, and how will it go through every 4 weeks for an entire cycle, having a different artistic style highlighted when Venus, the goddess of love and beauty and art, moves into that sign. In the same way, as Mars goes quite a bit faster than it could, but still not as fast as Venus. Remember, about 4 weeks or less for Venus, about 7 weeks for Mars. So Mars, although it has the energy of going fast, doesn't actually move faster. Obviously, when we start nearest the sun, Mercury moves the fastest, then Venus, then the Earth, then Mars, and all on out to the outer, slower planets. But Mars, when it moves, brings the image of speed, of hustle, of ambition. And as Mars spends 45 days in each sign, as it will in 2024, look at how your competition style changes as the sign Mars is in changes again and again. Look at how you fight and what it is you fight about. You're going to fight more with words when Mars is an air sign, and you're going to fight more physical or practical areas when Mars is in an earth sign. So look at your fighting style, both the one that you were born with and the one that the Mars has in the sky, and continue to move through so that you find yourself getting a feeling for the gestalt of what is Venus and what is Mars. And look forward to the next video when I talk about the signs of Venus and Mars and a little deeper what they're going to be doing in 2024. I hope you have a wonderful day.